So let's generate our motivation. And can come back to that awareness that we are part of an interconnected web of life. Not only human life, but all kinds of living beings. Each and every one of whom wants happiness and doesn't want to suffer. And yet, because of our ignorance, we become greedy, we become angry and resentful, and we harm each other. And in harming each other, we harm ourselves through creating destructive karma, which ripens in our own misery in the future. So this is a pretty tragic situation. And yet we're so fortunate to have encountered the Buddha's teachings that show us the way out of this situation. And so let's have a strong determination to take those teachings to heart, to integrate them in our life and in our mind, so that we can transform ourselves into fully awakened ones who have the complete wisdom, compassion, skillful means, and power to be of the greatest benefit to all living beings and help them overcome the situation that we're all suffering in now. So let's make that our motivation for being together today, our motivation for the retreat, and our motivation for life. So our motivation is the most important aspect of what we do. It's primarily our motivation that determines the value of our action, whether it's wholesome or unwholesome, virtuous or non-virtuous, constructive or destructive. And so paying attention to our motivation is really important. In doing so, we may discover all sorts of things about ourselves that, how to put it, are not so pleasant. Does that sound polite enough? Yeah. We may discover motivations of greed, of retaliation, of just being shut down and not wanting to listen to anybody, withdrawing. We may find motivations that lead us to keeping ourselves the busiest of the busy, doing all sorts of things that don't really need to be done, but that we make important in our own ways. Yeah. And So as Dharma practitioners, when we begin to see those things about ourselves, instead of despising ourselves or criticizing ourselves or feeling disheartened by this, to say, good, now I'm able to see this, and now I can do something about it. Yeah? So it's kind of like, if you're cleaning the house, you've got to see the dirt before you can clean it. If you have a corrupt system or government structure, you got to know where the corruption is so you can correct it. So see discovering these kinds of things as a step in the right direction. Don't criticize yourself. Repeat. Do not criticize yourself. Repeat. Do not get down on yourself, okay? And what I find very helpful in all of this is to come back, to the motivation, the way I just led it now, of thinking that, because when we get down on ourselves, we're isolating ourselves from everybody else. Everybody else is living their life. They're okay. I'm just a disaster. And that's not so realistic. So I find, coming back and remembering, okay, I'm part of an internet-connected web of life that includes not only all human beings, but all living beings, animals, insects, other kinds of life forms, and that we're all interconnected, influencing each other all the time. So one part of our Western culture is this overemphasis on self as an individual. I've got to, we talk about reinventing ourselves. We talk about making a name for ourselves. No, there's always the self that is the most important thing that we're looking out for all the time. My happiness, my reputation, my pleasure, my friends, my country, my values, everything me. Okay? And yet, we are actually part of this interconnected web. So thinking solely about ourselves is really very limiting. That self-centered thought isolates us from everybody else by thinking it works together with the self-grasping ignorance to think of ourselves as this, inherently existent person who is there, who has to be somebody. And who said that? Yeah? So, like I said, when we only have that thought of self, we isolate ourselves, when in fact we're really interconnected. Yeah. We all had breakfast this morning. Where did the food come from? I think all of you brought food, didn't you? Yeah. So the food that you ate this morning came from each other's offerings, and from offerings that other people who aren't here now gave to the Abbey in the past. So we're interconnected, aren't we? The meditation hall, where did it come from? This was once a garage, It was this dark, gloomy garage. The ceiling wasn't up like that. We didn't have the windows here. It just came down. All sorts of... there's an old kerosene tank over here, remember that? and all sorts of living beings in it. Yeah, and damp. But it got changed into a meditation hall that's been in use now for 13 years. And who did that? How did it change? It wasn't by magic. It was by the efforts of many people. Yeah, who took off the roof. And then Venerable Semke's brilliance in noticing that the engineer said that there should be a lulam beam across the top, but the contractor's aide was putting the roof back on without the beam. And so she, thank goodness, noticed it. Do you remember that? And said, "Woohoo!" So finally the roof got put on correctly. And then people, caulking all the, between the woods, the logs and so on. And of course putting a carpet in and putting light fixtures and painting it. And it used to be down where Chenrezig Hall is. This building used to be down there, right outside of Ananda Hall. When we wanted to build Chenrezig Hall, we had to hire somebody who moves buildings. And they jacked it up and dragged it up the hill and put it here. Yeah. And then all the mice moved in through all the holes. And we had to ask the mice to live happily ever after somewhere else. But the reason I'm saying this is that all of that happened due to the efforts of other living beings. And yet, when we come in here, we aren't always aware of the efforts of others. We aren't aware of how much we depend on others, how kind they have been to us through all that they have done. Yeah, how interconnected we are with them. We're not isolated individuals. And I think that awareness, the more we contemplate the interdependency in terms of the kindness of others, the more we, or put it this way, the less we feel alienated. Yeah. And the more we recognize the reality of our interconnection. And so seeing that, then we really see that we've been the recipient of a tremendous amount of kindness in our lives. Yeah. And this mind that says, other people have it better than me and life isn't fair, disappears because we realize, whoa, there's been a whole lot of kindness. Yeah. And then you get that kind of in your mind and feeling that. And then you open your eyes and you look again at all these living beings who we're related to, on whose efforts we depend just to stay alive and have all the things that we use and to know all the things that we know. We look at their lives, and all of them want happiness, as intensely as we want happiness. Okay? So pick your most unfavorite politician. I won't mention names because some people have gotten upset when I mention names. So you can have your own choice of unfavorite politicians. And people may have different choices, But even that person wants to be happy and doesn't want to suffer. Yeah. Pick the person who's harmed you the most in your life. And recognize that person just wants to be happy and not suffer. Yeah, think of all the young people in ISIS Yeah. And they just want to be happy and they don't want to suffer. And so if we look into everybody's heart, this is what's true for every living being, that wish to be happy and not suffer. And yet, and we benefit from each other and help each other. And yet, because of our ignorance, we harm each other. Yeah. When we look, yes, there are natural disasters. There's been earthquakes and tsunamis and volcanic explosions and hurricanes and cyclones and, drought and all sorts of things. Flooding, drought and flooding, it's amazing. Yeah. And yet, and so those are things happening from the side of nature. And yet, I often wonder what harms us the most, natural disasters or what we do to each other. Yeah. Warfare, whether it's economic warfare or spiritual warfare or military warfare, all these manifestations of hatred, of anger, and how much we harm each other, while deep in our hearts, the only thing we want is to be happy and be free of suffering. And when you look at the situation of other living beings and of ourselves as one part of that web, here you have a whole bunch of people who want to be happy, who mean well, and yet being overpowered by their afflicted mental states, especially anger, they harm each other and create one problem, one suffering after another problem, another suffering for each other. And when you really think about it, it's tragic, isn't it? Because what people want is totally the opposite of what we do. What we're creating the causes to have is not what we want to have as a result. Yeah, we harm others in an attempt to be happy. But in harming others, we create negative karma that impacts us and makes us suffer. And also we harm others, and then we have to live in a world with other living beings who are in pain and misery, which also doesn't make us happy. Yeah. So there's something wrong with the way we think. There's something wrong with us as human beings. Mm-hmm. And what the Buddha diagnosed this problem as is being rooted in ignorance. Okay? So the more manifest causes of the illness, greed, self-centeredness, anger, hatred, jealousy, arrogance, those kinds of things that we can see how they directly make people do actions in which we harm each other. And yet all those are rooted in ignorance, which is an ignorance that doesn't understand how we really exist, who we are. And that ignorance misconceives things. It makes us think that there's a real concrete person here. And as soon as we see that, I don't mean concrete literally, but that there's some kind of real me that is in control or should be in control, that exists by its own power, independent of everything else. And so ignorance creates that idea of self. It sees everybody else in that way. It sees everything in our environment as having some kind of essence from its own side. And due to that fundamental misapprehension of how we and other things exist, then all these other afflictive emotions arise, which motivate the actions, which bring about the painful results. So that real problem is rooted in ourself. And here you can see, one of the reasons why we human beings harm each other is that we don't realize that the fundamental problem lies in our own ignorance. Instead, we think the fundamental problem is other people's actions. Yeah. So we're always blaming other people, criticizing their actions, because we think those actions are the source of our own misery. Yeah. In actual fact, what other people are doing is just the cooperative condition. And sometimes we think we're being harmed when other people have absolutely no intention to harm us at all. But because of our own ignorance, our own suspicion, we see harm where there isn't any harm. We project bad motivations on others who don't have those bad motivations. So we make our own selves miserable. So, this thing of thinking that, of not understanding that the real source of our misery lies in our own mind with our own ignorance, and thinking that other people are the source of our misery and the source of our pleasure, gets us tangled up and becomes the reason why we harm each other so much. And how we harm the people upon whom we are dependent. That's the crazy thing, isn't it? We're dependent on all these other people to stay alive, and yet we harm them. We harm the people that we care about the most. Who do you say the most awful, horrible things to? Your family or strangers? Yeah? We say the most awful, horrible things to the people that we depend on the most, the people that we care about the most. That's crazy, isn't it? It's totally crazy. Because in harming those people, we're harming ourselves. We're pushing away the very people that we want to be close to. Yeah. If you look in your relationships, when we get angry at somebody we're very close to, if we go deep, deep, deep in our mind, what are we really trying to do? What is it we really want? Connection. Isn't it? Yeah, we want connection. We don't feel connected. And so we attack the other person. Does that bring about the kind of connection we want? No. And yet we keep doing it again and again and again, don't we? Yeah. And that's tragic. That's unbelievably sad. Because all of that pain doesn't need to exist. Yeah. We don't need to inflict pain on each other. And yet, because of our confusion, we do. And the same goes when other people say and do things that we feel are harmful to us. To realize, why are they doing that? Yeah. What they're really wanting is some kind of connection, but they don't know how to do it. And they're frustrated, and they're upset, and they're angry, and so they take it out on whoever happens to be in front of them, which happens to be us at that very moment. But it's not that those people really want to harm us. It's that they're confused and they're suffering. Yeah. I think often of those young men who are in ISIS. Yeah. And I thought a lot like this. I mean, before ISIS came about, I thought more about the situation in communist China, the young men who joined the People's Liberation Army, and then marched all over the country, destroying Buddhist temples and making the Sangha disrobe and everything. So whether it's the PLA or whether it's the ISIS, all those young men are actually in the bottom of their hearts. What they want is happiness. Yeah, that's what they're really wanting, is happiness. And yet, they're exposed to false political theories, false ideologies, twists in misunderstandings of religion, misunderstandings of political doctrines, and thinking that they will bring about some good. Then they sign up to be in these armies. And in the process, they either kill others, creating massive negative karma, which brings them suffering, or they die in the process of fighting other people. Yeah. No good comes of it either way. And yet, their motivation is, I'm just trying to do something good. Yeah. But here you can see the force of ignorance, how it clouds our mind, how it makes us confused and think that other people are our enemy, when the real source of our own pain is our own ignorance, anger, and clinging attachment. Yeah. In marital relationships, you start out loving each other. And then what happens when you fight? Yeah. You say the most awful, horrible things to each other. Why? What we're really wanting is some kind of connection, but we don't know how to make connection. So we let our frustration out on whoever is there. Okay? So if we can look at this situation in individuals' life, in groups' lives, in society's lives, and respond to it with compassion. Yeah. Not respond to it with disgust, like, oh, all these people are so stupid. because we're one of them. We're not any better than anybody else. Yeah. When our ignorance, anger, and attachment manifest, we do the same thing. Okay. We may not pick up a rifle, but our mouth becomes our weapon. And often what we say to other people is much more painful than a physical wound. Yeah. And so to look at this whole situation with compassion. Okay. Compassion does not mean that we feel sorry for somebody. Pity is useless. Pity is, I'm up here. You're down there. And the great and glorious me is going to help the stupid, ridiculous you, who I feel sorry for. Yeah, that's not compassion. Okay, compassion is equals. We're all equal. Yeah, somebody else just like me, wanting to be happy, not wanting pain. That's why His Holiness Dalai Lama says wherever he goes, that he sees the people, whoever he meets, as friends. Yeah. He doesn't see them as students, as subjects, as whatever. He sees them as equal, as friends. And so to have that attitude of compassion that wishes others and ourselves were free of all these different kinds of unsatisfactory conditions. And then not only wishes that, but develops the courage to jump in and try and do something. Yeah. We can't cure every problem, but the main thing is to keep our heart open and keep our heart connected. That's the main thing. And then, of course, whatever situation we encounter, to do what we can to be a benefit in whatever big or small way we can. Yeah. And to remember in doing that, because we often think, oh, I need to be Martin Luther King. If I'm going to benefit everybody, I need to be Martin Luther King. I need to be Mother Teresa. I need to, No, we don't need to do that. Yeah. If we are, great. But, yeah, we are surrounded by, people that these great altruistic hearts don't know personally. So we can give personal benefit to many individuals who we encounter, even strangers. So we shouldn't underestimate that and think, I've got to be some magnificent, famous person that Time magazine writes about in order to be, an altruistic saint. That's grasping for fame, I think. Yeah. But many of the great practitioners of the past, they're very humble, they're very low-key. Nobody knows who they are. The question came up later about yesterday about knowing who Buddhas are. Like I said, they don't wear name tags. And sometimes they're just very humble people that we think are nobody. But, due to their own internal cultivation, their minds are extraordinary. And due to just even the simple, plain things they do for others, they really influence others in a very good way. Yeah. And so to try and live our lives in that way, to progress along the path to full awakening, and even before we attain full awakening, to do what we can in whatever big or small ways we can with whoever is in front of our nose. Yeah. So after lunch, if somebody says, we need more people working in the kitchen, that is the proof of the pudding. Yeah. Do you say, yes, I'll go help in the kitchen? Or do you say, I've already offered service in many other ways, I'm leaving? Or, that's not my job. Or, I'm tired. Or, there's many other people who can do it. Okay. I'm just telling you some of my excuses. Yeah. But those simple situations are often, the real test of to what extent we are integrating the Dharma in our life, and to what extent it is theoretical in our minds. Okay? So I thought it was very sweet yesterday when I was looking out my window, watching, different people arrive, and then everybody go and help that person with their suitcase and their groceries. And so whole streams of people walking up the hill just to help one person. Yeah. And then Larissa says to me, oh, it's fun. Yeah. But that kind of, it's a small thing, but it's a big help, isn't it? Yeah, if you arrive at a new place and you don't know where to go or what to do, yeah, one person, let alone 4 or 5 others coming to help you, is a big thing. Okay? So there's all sorts of ways to act in this world, to extend kindness to others. Okay? So this is a New Year's retreat. And so I think at the end of the year, it's a good time to do some review about how we've lived and how we want to live. Okay? So, lots of people make New Year's resolutions, but we all know what happens to them. Yeah? Has anybody made a New Year's resolution that's actually worked and been carried out? Yeah, you have? What did you do?
Well, it was here, actually, a couple of years ago, taking a couple of the precepts.
Ah, okay. Yeah, so that's good. Taking the precepts is a good New Year's resolution, and then to keep them. Yeah. So, what we want to do is develop not unrealistic minds that promise ourselves things we can't accomplish. But I think actually precepts is a very good example, because it's something that you thought about for a period of time, recognized that you could do, and that you wanted to do, and then did it. Yeah? Yeah, so biting off things that are within our ability to chew. Okay? But I also think before biting off new things, and I would like to recommend this, what I just spoke about, this whole attitude and motivation as maybe being the thing that becomes your New Year's resolution. But before we could, or as I should say, as part of, determining new ways we want to go in and new ways we want to cultivate in ourselves, we need to also review what we've done before and see habitual patterns that we fall into that haven't been working. And we all have these habitual patterns, don't we? Sometimes they're emotional patterns. Yeah, we're almost like push button automatic emotions. You know, somebody criticizes me, boing, I get angry. Yeah, somebody does better than me, boing, I get jealous. Yeah, without even thinking. Yeah, or we think like, gee, jealousy, anger, not so good. I should do something about it. But then we're so well habituated. A similar situation happens the next day. We're doing the same thing. Yeah, like I spoke about last night, my opinion factory operating overtime. Yeah. Completely aware that it does that, and I keep doing it. Once in a while, my opinions are right, though, aren't they? But even if they're right, do I need to say them? Do I need to, dump them on others? Okay. So what I'm getting at is looking for habits in our life, looking for patterns. They say in the thought training teachings to pick the affliction that causes us the most damage in our life. Work on that one first. Yeah. Sometimes people, when they first encounter the Dharma, they notice how attached they are to food. Yeah. Like, I'm so attached to food. I just think about morning meditation is about breakfast, mid-morning meditation is about lunch, afternoon meditation is about dinner, and evening meditation is about a snack. And, but actually, yes, we need to reduce our attachment to food. But ask if that is the greatest problem in your life. Yeah. What really causes you the most difficulties in your life? What causes you to say or do things that are harmful to yourself and others? Yeah. And identify those and have some determination to work on those. It doesn't mean that you're going to conquer them by next Tuesday. Okay? But identify those things and something of, okay, this one I have to really look out for, how it manifests in my life. And I have to cultivate the antidotes to it. Mm-hmm. This is one reason why in retreats we keep silence, either for the whole retreat or in the case of this retreat, we keep silence from after the evening meal until after breakfast, because that gives us, until after lunch, because that time of silence gives us the opportunity to really observe our actions and especially to observe our speech, because we act through body, speech, and mind. Oh. Yes, a new Dharma student. Yeah. So, our word, keeping silence, lets us look inside and observe what kind of thoughts are going on in our mind and what kind of impulses we have to speak. Yeah. How much things just get blurted out of our mouth without thought of, is this true? Is this kind? Is this an appropriate time? Is it something that really needs to be said? Or is it just me blabbering away to draw attention to myself or to divert myself from something else? Okay? So it's just interesting to use that time of silence to watch our motivations. Watch our speech, watch our habits, watch the kind of habitual thoughts that go on in our mind. And then look at which ones, cause us the most difficulty in our lives. And then think, well, what are the Dharma antidotes to those? How do I need to look at the situation differently so that I'm not suppressing that emotion and I'm not acting it out, but I'm seeing the situation differently so that emotion just dissolves. Okay? So, for example, what I was saying, in the case of anger, if we're angry at somebody, to think that person is just trying to be happy, but they're very confused about the causes of happiness. If you think that way about somebody else, it changes how you look at them. It doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to go along with their trips or allow them to continue to do what they're doing or enable it, but it means that you don't need to be angry, and the space that is in your mind when you don't have the anger gives you the opportunity to think of other ways that are more constructive to deal with the situation. But the first thing to do is not to say, what should I do, but how can I return my own mind to a state of balance? How can I rebalance my own mind? Because then from that balanced mind we can think about what to actually do. Okay, so how does Vajrasattva fit into all of this? Well, we've been talking about our motivation for doing Vajrasattva practice. And also Vajrasattva is a purification practice. So purification means that we're making amends for misdeeds that we did in the past, actions that harmed others and harmed us. Okay. And so to do that purification, we have to identify what those actions are. We have to identify the mental states behind them. And then with the Vajrasattva practice, it uses a lot of symbology to help us do the purification. So in part of the Vajrasattva practice, you do reflection on things that you've done that you regret having done, and you think of other ways, to approach that kind of situation and rebalance your mind if something similar should happen in the future. And then with the so you do that as part of the Vajrasattva practice. But then when you visualize Vajrasattva and recite the mantra, we think of light from Vajrasattva, who's on top of our head, coming down through us and just flushing out all that stuff that we regret. All those things that we've thought, said, and done out of a wish to be happiness, but ignorant about the causes of happiness. And we flush those things out. And so then instead of feeling like we're carrying all that rubbish around with us in a backpack, that gets heavier each year that goes on, we are clearing things up, putting them to rest, resolving them, so that we don't go in to the next day with grudges. We don't go in to the next day with suspicion and accusations and paranoia. Okay? So Vajrasattva works very much on that, part of it we're working cognitively, looking at situations, bringing in the Lamrim meditations and the thought training teachings to help us change our mind. And we're also working symbolically with Vajrasattva as the manifestation of the fully perfected mind that we want to develop. The mind of a Buddha. And yesterday in the teachings we talked about 18 unshared qualities of the Buddha. We want to become like that. So we see Vajrasattva as somebody who's done that, or as a manifestation of all those qualities that we want to develop. And then, through the light and nectar from Vajrasattva coming into us, we learn to forgive ourselves, and we learn to have a valid self-confidence through which we can continue to practice and cultivate our good qualities. Okay, so more of this will be discussed as we go on and brought out by the people who lead the meditation. So we have a few minutes for Q&A, if you like.
Thank you so much for the teaching so far. How will I ask this question? So when you say Vajrasattva helps one to forgive themselves, the question in my head is, how? Because I think coming from Christian background where really, most things you do, especially if it's for pleasure, like it's wrong, so coming with that kind of baggage, I find for myself, it's really easy to beat myself up. I can find so many things, like you tell me to find something to cleanse, and I can do that. The harder piece is how to do that without, beating myself up.
Yeah. Anybody else have that problem? I think that this is a universal problem, especially for those of us who grew up in the West, who somehow either consciously were told or imbibed through the environment that if we did something wrong, we were a bad person. In other words, the action and the person are exactly the same thing. Yeah, so if there's a bad action, the person is bad. In Buddhism, we say the action is one thing, the person is another thing. Yeah. As a person, we all have the Buddha nature. We have the potential to become fully awakened Buddhas. Okay. Right now, we're sentient beings. We've done stupid things. We've done harmful things. Yeah. But that doesn't mean that as a person we're defective. It doesn't mean that we're hopeless and helpless and irredeemable. It just means we made a mistake and we need to clean it up. Okay? So don't confuse the action with the person. That's one step in it. The second thing is, we often have learned that the guiltier we feel, the more we're atoning for our mistake. Okay? I once, maybe we should try it in this retreat too. I was once leading a retreat, and we divided into the groups of the Jews, the Catholics, and the Protestants to talk about who had our guilt and who had the most guilt. Yeah. I think now within Protestants you could do mainstream Protestants and evangelicals, because they're pretty different, So anyway, the Protestants did come close. Yeah. The Jews and the Catholics were in close competition. Okay. Because you're brought up, that you should feel guilty. And the worse you feel about something, the more you hate yourself, the more you criticize yourself, the more you're atoning for your mistake. Is that reasonable? Does that make any sense? Yeah? Does that make any sense at all? I mean, step back and look at it with an adult, reasonable mind. Does that make any sense? No. Makes no sense at all. How does my hating myself and beating up on myself make amends for harm that I've done? It doesn't. The guilt keeps me immobilized. It keeps me stuck. It keeps me from making amends. Yeah. So in Buddhism, guilt is something to get rid of. Guilt is something you purify. It's not something you cultivate. Okay. We cultivate instead regret. Okay. Regret is simply, I made a mistake. I'm sorry. I want to repair that. Guilt can't be so straightforward. Guilt is, look what I did! How could I have done that? No wonder nobody likes me. I'm condemned forever. Oh, what a horrible person I am. Unforgivable what I've done. I hope nobody knows what I've done, because then nobody will even speak to me again, because I'm so terrible. Oh, culpa mia, oy vey. Yeah. So you see, I mean, what is guilt? It's just self-centeredness, isn't it? It's I'm the worst one in this show. Yeah. Whereas regret is, boy, I made a mistake. Let's repair it. Let's go on in life. I have potential. Okay? So that's how you forgive yourself. Also, another step in forgiving ourselves, something I found quite helpful, is to realize that the person I am now and the person who did that action that I don't feel good about having done, we exist in the same continuity, but we are not exactly the same person. Okay? We're in the continuity, but that person is not who I am today, Because if it were who I was today, I would not be wanting to make amends. I would not be wanting to purify. I would be still doing that same thing. So, but what I find helpful in doing is, okay, I'm not the same person who did that action 5 years ago, or 5 days ago, or 5 minutes ago. Yeah. But I understand that person. I understand that person really well. I understand her from the inside. And when I look at her mind that was motivating to do that action, when I look at what was going on, there was some kind of unfulfilled need. There was something I was trying to accomplish through that action that I wasn't consciously aware of And I wasn't consciously aware that the method of accomplishing that was skewed. Yeah. Now I could look back on that person. I understand better what her need was. I understand what she was feeling. I understand why. I understand how much she was confused. And why her anger or her greed or whatever it was got out of control. And I can look back and have some compassion for her. Okay. Compassion or forgiveness doesn't mean that you say the action was okay. It means that you're not going to be angry about it anymore. Yeah. So we can look back in our past and say, what I did was not okay. But I understand that person. And I'm going to learn from her experience. And I'm going to try and put my energy in a better direction in the future. And so in that way, we forgive ourselves. Okay, does that make some sense?
Yeah, I think it's easier when it's making amends for something I did to somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm also thinking of, so those actions, I think you talked a little bit about it, that cause me to want to isolate.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm becoming antisocial a little bit, and I'm not going to see friends, I'm not going to Dharma talks and things like this. I'm starting to isolate. So it's not something I'm necessarily doing to somebody else, but it's something I think I'm doing
To yourself, yeah. Can you look at that person who's doing that as the person, as like you're looking at another person? You know, the same way. You know, the person who's doing that was the person in the past. This is me now. There's a connection, but we're not exactly the same. So can I look at her and understand why is she, what's really going on when she's when she's isolating herself? What's she really wanting? What's she really needing? What's she really trying to say? Yeah. And then you can have some empathy for her, some compassion for her, and you might be able to help her fulfill that need or see that need from another perspective so that it doesn't manifest in that way. Okay? I call it kind of having a little discussion with myself. Yeah? But just kind of learning to speak honestly to myself instead of covering stuff up.
So we've been talking, Venerable, about understanding the ignorance or whatever nice way you can put it of the other person. They want to be happy. And then also you look to forgive yourself for that. What if in a situation where you have been a part of such a deep conflict where there's anger and animosity on the other person's part towards you? And so this is slightly different, I think, perhaps. And you have that conversation with yourself, but and you realize what you've done was unethical. And it's cut off, the communication with that other person who you've harmed. How do you live with that, or how do you change that? You know, you just sit there in isolation and you apologize as much as you can, but they're shut off and they're no longer there to apologize to.
You mean they're shut off in the sense that they don't want to see you?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I mean that.
Yeah. Okay. Then the important thing is in your own mind to have that resolution, and in your own mind to forgive yourself and to have some compassion for them. Yeah. That they're still stuck in their anger. Yeah. And how much they're suffering by being stuck in their anger, which is totally unnecessary. Yeah, that they're suffering unnecessarily. Sometimes when other people are so mad at us they don't want to talk to us, then again we feel guilty. So we need to clean out that guilt. And we become very sensitive, we're very reactive to the fact that somebody's mad at us. We can't bear that somebody's mad at us. You know, it's unbearable that somebody's mad at us. But it's not so much that their suffering is unbearable. It's that we're suffering from the thought that somebody doesn't like us. Yeah. And that thought that somebody doesn't like us, that breaks every rule of our universe. Yeah. Because everybody's supposed to like us.
Now I'm really ashamed.
Yeah. So I think it also involves developing some fortitude on our side to deal with the pain of knowing that somebody else is stuck in their anger against us, which is really useless. And there's no way at this particular moment that we can help them put their anger down so that they can be happy. So we just have to bear that suffering. Yeah. But focus the mind on compassion for the other individual who is suffering unnecessarily from their anger. And we can then also learn a lot from watching how much they suffer by holding a grudge, by thinking, this is what I do when I hold a grudge. Yeah, so what you're seeing in the other person, their refusal to communicate, their blame, whatever it is, this is what I do when I'm stuck in holding a grudge. Do I want to continue doing that? Clearly not. So then whatever situation I'm holding a grudge in, which could be about somebody else and some other thing that's totally unrelated to this, I need to clean that up. And so in this way, you're making, instead of getting stuck and reacting to the idea that somebody's mad at me or somebody doesn't like me, you're learning from what you're watching them do and you're cleaning up your own act. Okay.
I was just wondering, sometimes, right, it's like there's suffering and I feel the suffering, but I can't conceptualize it. It's like, I don't know that I'm suffering. Does that make sense?
So you're suffering, you're miserable, but you're not aware that how miserable you are.
Right, I feel it, but it's hard to recall it or remember or even put a finger on it or like define it or
Okay.
and then that, of course, that like interferes with my ability to later on say, I don't want to experience that again because I already forgot about it. I didn't even know what it was.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So I think this also is something that I've talked to other people, that many people experience. Sometimes sometimes, in some cases, it comes because when we grew up, our family didn't label emotions. Because as kids, we learn to label emotions by listening to the adults around us. But in some families, people don't talk about what they feel. They feel a lot of things, but they don't talk about it. So the children don't learn to identify this feeling with this label and to actually, give it a name and understand what it is. So sometimes that's going on. Sometimes it's that we're so used to being outer directed and having our senses occupied and playing with everything outside that we're out of touch with our own feelings. We don't recognize them. Yeah? And so to remedy that, I think this is one thing that meditation really helps, because when you're meditating, you're sitting quietly and you're watching your distractions, but it also becomes more obvious what you're feeling. And then you practice identifying what that feeling is. Okay? And in identifying it, you can first ask yourself, is it a feeling of pushing something or someone away? Or is it a feeling of grasping and holding on to it? Yeah. And just start with that identification. Yeah. And then from that you can go on to, different kinds of holding something and different kinds of pushing away. Okay.
It's like starting from where we started.
Yeah. Yeah. And another one, the holding on and the pushing away, and then the spacing out. Yeah. When do I just I zone out? Yeah. I'm not there. I'm in la la land somewhere. Yeah. And so just observing those three.